From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here with a Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'm here in the office with fellow reporter Audrey Thiebert to talk about an interview she did with State GOP Chair Brian Schimming. So, Audrey, what did you guys talk about?
Hey, Kate. So, with the presidential election coming up, we talked a bit about Tim Walz as Harris's VP pick, as well as issues driving Wisconsin voters in this election, and then Trump's prospects in Wisconsin for November.
All right, Audrey, thanks, and let's get right into the interview.
Hey, Brian, thanks for joining us for our Capital Chats. To get started, if you want to sort of talk about how you're feeling about the presidential race, specifically if you think it's going to be harder or easier to beat Harris than Biden going forward.
Well, Wisconsin's definitely a target state. I mean, we've had 12 elections in the last 24 years that have been decided by less than 30,000 votes statewide. So when they say Wisconsin's a purple state, they're not kidding. We've had a lot of close races, including Ron Johnson's race back in 2022. We had overall a good year that year. We were disappointed to lose the governor's race, but the Democrats dropped $100 million in on Ron Johnson and still lost. They spend money like crazy, but they don't have a very good record for showing it. We picked up seats in both houses of the legislature. In 2022, we picked up the state treasurer's race, almost won the Secretary of State's race, did pick up a congressional seat. Now Congressman Van Orden out in western Wisconsin. So we had a pretty good year. We had a great off year here, and I'm expecting Wisconsin will go down to the wire. One of the things that we've seen here already, multiple candidate visits from both tickets, and I think that's going to continue. I feel good about Wisconsin.
Yeah, and that sort of is my next question, is if you think the Trump campaign has the presence in Wisconsin that it needs versus the Harris campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. We have dozens of people on the ground all around the state. We have almost 35 field offices on top of, dozens of other county party offices around the state. So the activity level is great. We're hiring people all the time. The energy level is good. I travel the state. I have been for over 30 years. I feel like I put 30 years in the last 3 months. Traveling around the state, but the energy is great. We signed up 5,500 volunteers to be poll workers. By November of last year, we have hundreds and hundreds more that are going to be poll watchers. It's really, the energy is terrific. We had a great convention here in Wisconsin. I was proud that we were able to host the national convention here in Wisconsin in Milwaukee. We came out of there unified. So I think we're heading in the right direction. And look, they say Kamala Harris has got a little bit of a honeymoon right now. And, she's the new candidate. She has picked a new vice presidential candidate. They will go into their convention here. So she's getting a lot of attention. And so it's not something that's unexpected. But I think once voters in Wisconsin and across the country do a little bit more examination of Kamala Harris, the honeymoon will be cut short early.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And then sort of going to the legislative races, do you think that the Republicans are going to be able to keep the majorities? And do you have any concerns about that in the next, cycle?
Yeah, the Republicans have had control of the Senate, state Senate, and the state assembly for several years. I think they keep the majorities in both houses. Look, we essentially went through a second reapportionment. 2 years after one map, then voters get forced to have to go through another map, which I thought was unfair to the voters of this state. But the Democrats and the liberals forced that issue. And so now we have a whole new set of maps that people are voting under. But the truth of the matter is, no matter how the maps come out, there are some basics here in Wisconsin. And that is, kitchen table issues are very, very important. We see in the polling, both for local races and for statewide and national races, that economy is number one. The number one issue by far. Immigration, also a very important issue. So those are issues that play to Republicans right now. And I think that it also plays to Republicans in legislative races, not just at the top of the ticket. So I expect that we'll keep both houses, and I think that balance is important because we have a very liberal governor.
Yeah, and sort of going back to the presidential race, Tim Walz was picked as Kamala's running mate. Do you think that what are your thoughts on Tim Walz as VP? And then do you think he has an advantage because he's a Midwesterner, at least for voters in Wisconsin?
So Tim Walz now makes this between him and Kamala Harris the most liberal Democrat presidential ticket in decades, if not ever. He's a hardcore liberal governor of Minnesota. She's a hardcore liberal vice president and was the most liberal, rated by independent ratings, the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate. I think the challenge for the Democrats here, both in Wisconsin and nationally, is that Kamala Harris doesn't have just one opponent. She has two. She has Donald Trump, obviously, but her other opponent is Joe Biden, because she's clearly trying to run away from the last 4 years. That's going to be pretty hard for her to do and for Governor Walz to do, because they are both hardcore liberals from the left end of the party, and actually to the left of even Joe Biden. And so I think that doesn't go over well in Wisconsin. The fact that Tim Walz has a Midwestern zip code, his problem is that his mental address is in California. So the zip code may be in Minnesota, but he really he's an embarrassment, I think. And the Democrats avoided an inter-party fight by picking him instead of the governor of Pennsylvania, who I think got a little bit more moderate profile, but they couldn't even have that in today's Democratic Party. So I'm not surprised it's Tim Walz, other than yet again, the Democratic Party left whatever moderates are left there out on the street.
And you sort of touched on this in, I think, the last question, but what are the main issues that you're seeing in Wisconsin that are sort of motivating GOP voters to go to the polls, or you think will motivate people in November?
Yeah, no doubt about it, especially in a presidential year. The number one issue in Wisconsin is the economy. There's not really another issue that's close. Immigration is very, very important. We've had immigration. Number one, I think the average voter on the street understands the immigration now, and that the Biden-Harris administration have had what amounts to an open borders policy. But we feel it here in Wisconsin. There's every state is a border state now. We saw it in Whitewater, Wisconsin, where you had 1,000 illegal immigrants come into the local market. I'm a former city council person in Whitewater, so I know that city very, very well. And so I would say the economy, immigration, there are a number of other things. I think the Democrats' big problem and our big advantage is that all of the kitchen table issues, whether it's gas prices, grocery prices, immigration, insurance, interest rates, all of them are playing towards Republicans generically right now. That is a huge advantage, because the Democrats can put up $1 billion worth of advertising every week, but when you shut the TV off and then go to the grocery store, the reality hits. The reality hits when you can't buy as much as you usually would at the grocery store, or what you are buying costs half again what it did just 4 or 5 years ago. So I think that's a huge disadvantage for the Democrats. It's a huge advantage for the Republicans, and people will end up asking, even though Kamala Harris is the new standard bearer for the Democratic Party, as I say, she has to run against Joe Biden. So even though she may be the new standard bearer, ultimately the old question still comes into play. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And in every single poll out there, Wisconsin and national, the voters are saying they are worse off than they were 4 years ago.
Yeah, thanks so much for expanding on that. That was my last question. Was there anything else that I didn't ask about that you wanted to sort of touch on before we hop off the call?
No, I just obviously a very important Wisconsin, important in the state. That's why we had that Republican National Convention here. Was proud to host it, and I think we were able to show the state and the country the difference between us and them. And as we go through a couple of weeks here, where Kamala Harris is getting our polling honeymoon, I guess. At some point, the honeymoon ends. It always does. And you check out of the hotel and go home. And then going home for people now is really, really rough because of the economic issues. And people are not going to forget it, no matter how much advertising Kamala Harris and Governor Walz spend their money on.
Well, thanks so much for joining us for Capital Chats, Brian.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Audrey, thank you so much for sharing that interview with us. If our listeners want to learn more about the presidential race and how it's folding out in Wisconsin, they can head to our website at wispolitics.com. In the meantime, I'm Kate Morton.
And I'm Audrey Thiebert.
Thanks for tuning in to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.